Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at well, something pretty dark from Roman history.
It is, yeah.
We're doing a deep dive into the systemic, just unyielding brutality the Romans reserved for runaway slaves. And we're going to focus specifically on the women, the fugitiva.
It's a deep dive that really forces you to understand the whole legal and social architecture of Rome. We're not just looking at violence, it's calculated. It's a system.
A system of control.
Exactly. I mean, you have to get your head around this, the concept of freedom, this inherent right we talk about all the time today. It would have been utterly incomprehensible. I mean, even ludicrous to a Roman master. To them, a slave was categorized as res mancipi, property.
Just property.
A living tool, not a person with agency, just a tool that happened to breathe.
And so their escape, it wasn't just, a property crime, was it? It was something much bigger.
Oh, much bigger. It was an act that threatened the stability of everything, the social order, the economy, and critically, the spiritual structure that Rome was built on.
But we're not going to start with the law books. We want to start with the feeling of it, the visceral reality of an escape attempt. Because that desperation, that's what really defines the stakes here.
That's absolutely the right way to approach it. You have to ground this kind of analysis in the immediate, desperate reality of the person living it.
So let's try to imagine that moment.
Well,
Our sources describe it so vividly. The air is thick. It's described as a raw wound of cold and dampness that just clings to your lungs.
right.
Every breath you take is shallow, and it scrapes at a throat that's already raw with fear. You can feel your bare feet just slapping against the slick, uneven stone.
That frantic rhythm of running.
Exactly. It's this desperate pulse against the silence of the night. Her attempt to escape was this one profound act of saying, I am a person against the world's most powerful system of ownership.
And that imagery, that cold grip of fear you're describing, that's so crucial because it immediately tells you the sheer magnitude of what she's doing.
It's not a small thing.
No. Escape wasn't just an economic loss. It was an affront to the very fabric of Roman society. It was a direct challenge to the paterfamilias, the absolute authority of the head of the household. It was a disruption of the natural order, an order the gods themselves were believed to have sanctioned.
And the sources really emphasize that for a woman, for the fugitiva, this was seen as an even greater transgression. So why? Why was a woman running away treated with such specific, heightened alarm?
Well, it's because of the dual nature of their roles. Women were, they were essential to the household, to the familia. They were often domestic managers, wet nurses, even, partners in a master's domestic life, whether they wanted to be or not.
So it's more personal.
So much more personal. If a male agricultural slave ran, that's an economic loss. A big one, maybe, but it's fundamentally about labor. If a female domestic slave ran, well, that challenged these deeply ingrained expectations of female obedience. And more importantly, it was a profound psychological threat to the intimacy and the perceived security of the Roman family itself.
So the punishment had to reflect that.
It had to. It had to be designed not just to reclaim her labor, but to be this comprehensive, terrorizing example. It was that cold hand closing around her fleeting breath of freedom.
That brings up a really crucial economic question for me, though. If a single female slave, an ancilla, often didn't have the highest financial value, not compared to, say, a skilled male blacksmith or a really productive field hand, why did the state and the master invest so much? So much time and public spectacle into punishing her.
That's a brilliant point.
Doesn't the cost of the pursuit, the branding, the whole legal process, doesn't it sometimes outweigh the actual value of the slave?
It does, and that's where we have to shift how we're looking at this. We stop seeing the slave as just property and start seeing her as a tool of deterrence. The cost was an investment in social stability. Punishing the fugitiva wasn't about getting back the value of that one lost asset. It was about maximizing the deterrent effect for the millions of other enslaved people. Her suffering was monetized as a public warning.
So her body becomes a billboard.
A walking, screaming billboard for the absolute futility of resistance. They had to reassert control, and they had to do it visibly, brutally, and undeniably.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This reality of the failed gamble and how they reassert that control. Let's start with the scale of Roman slavery, because I think it's often overlooked.
Completely.
We are talking about millions of people captured in war, born into it, the vernae or sold for debt. They were the absolute backbone of the empire.
The sheer volume is just staggering.
Hmm.
And, while male slaves faced just grueling conditions in quarries and fields, women faced these very specific vulnerabilities tied to their roles.
You mentioned the household.
Right. They were everything from sophisticated domestic managers to skilled weavers to just brutalized agricultural laborers. And of course, many were forced into sex work, the meretresses.
Yeah.
The body of the female slave was controlled absolutely, not just for her labor, but for reproduction and for sexual exploitation.
And that must have made the act of running away even more dangerous for them.
So-
I mean, if you're captured out in the wild, you're outside the brutal protection of a household, but protection nonetheless. You're facing acute risks from bandits, strangers, even the slave catchers themselves.
It was a desperate, almost suicidal calculation. And the Roman legal system, it knew how often this happened. There was a law, the Edict of the Aediles, that said if a slave was recaptured, the master was legally required to tell any future buyer that she had a history of running away.
So she was damaged goods.
Damaged goods, which is why the pursuit was so relentless and why the punishment had to be so immediate and so final.
Okay, let's go back to her flight, to those final moments. She's pushed herself deeper into the darkness. She's running on pure desperation. She's getting near the edge of the city, maybe hoping to just blend into the early morning crowds.
Yeah, she can probably smell it, the scent of pine, of damp earth. It's this fleeting comfort, the smell of the world outside the city walls.
But then the system starts closing in. The urban landscape gives way to the pursuit. She catches a glimpse of something. Metal. A fleeting shimmer in that pre-dawn gloom.
A patrol, maybe carrying torches or lanterns. And right there, that hope of the wilderness just collides with the reality of an organized, systematic hunt.
So she dives into a thicket. Thorns are tearing at her skin. The pain is almost a welcome distraction from the sheer terror. She's hiding, but she can hear them crashing through the undergrowth. She hears the dogs. It's inescapable.
And then that moment of recapture, that's when the whole fragile illusion of liberty it shatters. The silence of the pursuers breaks with this sudden triumphant shout.
You hear it.
You hear it, and then you hear the sound of bodies crashing through the brush right towards you. A rough hand grabs her arm, yanks her out of the thicket. She just falls to her knees in the damp earth, completely spent.
And this is where the sheer unyielding force of the Roman state just asserts itself. Standing over her, you have the captors. Their faces are grim, their eyes are hard, no pity at all, just silhouetted against the gray of the dawn.
The fight just goes out of her. It's replaced by this hollow, chilling ache. Her crime, in that moment, was the unforgivable act of asserting that she was human.
Right.
The coldness she feels, that's the touch of a world that legally, socially, saw her only as property. The realization is instant. My punishment is coming. And it's not just designed to hurt me. It's designed to obliterate the very will to dream of this again.
That's spiritual fracturing.
Yeah.
That's the first punishment, isn't it? Before they even lay a hand on her again.
It's psychological warfare before the physical war, and then comes the walk of shame.
They bind her wrists with coarse rope, chafing them raw, and they march her back. Not quietly. Back through the waking city. They make her a spectacle.
And that public display is absolutely deliberate. It's an immediate advertisement of the system's effectiveness.
Yeah.
The early morning vendors setting up, the other slaves on their errands, the occasional citizen, they all turn their heads.
And what's in that look? Our sources suggest it's a mix, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Morbid curiosity, maybe a flicker of pity, but mostly just cold indifference.
Yes, and that's the point. The massive public display is designed to maximize her humiliation, to reinforce her shame, to isolate her completely. It is a calculated descent into a much deeper despair.
The city itself, which is normally a place of, life and commerce, it becomes this hostile stage just for her.
The whispers she hears, the fragments of conversation, they confirm it. Her fate is being discussed, judged, and cemented in the minds of total strangers. And the fact that she, a woman, even attempted this, it requires an exceptionally severe public response. The punishment has to be tailored to completely obliterate her spirit.
So this journey, this slow, agonizing march back to the center of power, it leads us right into the first official stage of retribution.
Yeah.
We're moving from a temporary public humiliation to a permanent physical mark.
Right, the system has to make sure this shame is indelible.
Yes, the first action has to be decisive,
Yeah.
and everyone has to be able to recognize it.
So we go into this next phase. We're calling it the obliteration of dignity.
They don't take her back to her old master's home. That would imply, a simple return to labor. No, they take her to a public square, the Forum, or an equivalent market where a crowd is already gathering. They've been drawn by the commotion, by the guards.
The staging is meticulous. You see a makeshift platform, crudely built, standing stark and ominous in the center of the square. This isn't some quiet legal proceeding.
No.
This is theater. And the stripping away of her dignity, making her an object of scorn and warning, that is a profound act of dehumanization.
The whole moment is focused on just reframing who she is. The sunlight feels like a spotlight, magnifying her shame. The air tastes metallic, like a premonition of the pain that's coming. She's pushed onto the platform, and a sick silence just falls over the crowd.
And now we get to the horrifying sensory details of the branding. The ultimate act of turning a person into an object. She can hear the clink of metal. She can hear the hiss of the brazier heating the iron. And her eyes just fixate on it. On the glowing iron, its tip a fiery orange against the pale morning sky. You can feel the heat radiating from it.
So before that iron even touches her skin, let's talk about the legal and practical meaning of this mark. The brand itself was usually an abbreviation, right? Like FUG for fugitives or fugitiva.
That's right. Or sometimes the full word etched onto her arm or her forehead or her cheek. And it served two undeniable purposes.
The first one being practical.
Practical, exactly. It's an instant marker for any other owner, any slave catcher, the fugitive area, or any magistrate. It instantly identifies her as a known flight risk. If she ever runs again, if she's captured somewhere else, there is no doubt about her history.
It minimizes the financial risk for any future buyer.
Precisely. But the symbolic power, you could argue that was even greater. This was an indelible inscription of power onto her very flesh. The brand literally reduced her to property, permanently marked as damaged goods, but still valuable as a warning.
And the shame of that scar would just be a constant, visible companion. This is a punishment that continues for the rest of her life, long after the searing pain is gone.
And this is where you see the Roman legal system prioritizing that systemic deterrence over simple economic efficiency. The pain itself is instantaneous, it's absolute. A searing, white-hot agony that just rips through her.
The scream that comes out of her is just primal, isn't it? Raw and involuntary. That's the price of her failed freedom.
And the smell. The acrid, sickening smell of burning flesh fills the air. For everyone watching, that smell reinforces the finality of what's just happened.
So the branding is this permanent declaration that she's unreliable. It's a defiant mark etched in suffering, a reminder that resistance is futile.
It's the first, most painful lesson in the curriculum of Roman retribution. Freedom isn't just denied to you, it is physically scoured from your very body.
I wonder, before they got to the branding, did they ever use lesser measures? Were there like intermediate steps for a first-time runaway who wasn't violent?
Yes, that's where the legal nuances are interesting. For certain runaways, especially if they were caught quickly and weren't seen as highly defiant, they might use a middle collar.
A collar.
A middle collar, yeah. And these collars often had inscriptions on them, sometimes threatening more punishment, sometimes just saying, "My name is X, I belong to Y, please return me." They were a temporary solution and much cheaper than a public branding, which needed a magistrate and all this public staging.
So the fact that they went straight to the brand, the fugitiva mark, suggests her flight was seen as particularly egregious. Or maybe the master was just especially vengeful.
Precisely. For a female domestic slave, running away was often seen as this profound personal betrayal by the master, so the ultimate humiliation of the brand becomes necessary.
So the spectacle is over. She collapses. That burning mark on her skin is just this heavy, constant weight. And the crucial thing is, she's not just a slave anymore. She's a marked slave.
And that visible scar guarantees worse treatment, constant suspicion, and often an immediate transfer to the most arduous, physically debilitating tasks they have.
It's a living billboard, like you said, of the empire's power and her unreliability. And this transfer, this signifies the shift, doesn't it? From that acute public pain to a deeper, chronic, debilitating suffering.
Right. The Romans are trying to break the will through exhaustion now, not just through a single act of violence.
Which leads us directly to the next stage.
The system knows. It knows that one moment of pain, no matter how severe, might not break the internal spirit. So they need a sustained environment of depletion.
So Section 3, the systematic erosion of spirit. She's taken away from the city center, transferred to this grim, foreboding compound on the outskirts. The gates, heavy and iron-bound, just clang shut with this sound of absolute finality.
And inside, the air is just thick with the smells of sweat, dust, and unending human suffering. This is a mill, a pastrinum, often attached to a large agricultural estate.
And grain is being ground here day and night.
Day and night. powered by the sheer, unyielding force of enslaved bodies. The environment itself is engineered for maximum suffering while also maximizing production.
You can just imagine the sounds. The rhythmic groan of the heavy millstones, the shuffle of feet, the crack of the whip. It's just this perpetual symphony of despair.
And the other slaves you see there, mostly women and men who are deemed untrustworthy or maybe too weak for heavy outdoor labor, they're just hollowed out by exhaustion. Their faces are etched with this chilling resignation.
And her brand, that fugitiva mark, it would immediately set her apart, wouldn't it?
Oh, instantly. It confirms her unreliability and it guarantees she'll get the worst supervision. Here, the work is relentless. She'd be forced to constantly turn these heavy millstones, often in shifts so long that sleep is measured in these dangerous sporadic naps while you're still chained or tethered to the stones.
And the sheer physical toll of this kind of labor is just staggering. It's a slow, agonizing death, isn't it? A systematic erosion of the human spirit through just sheer physical depletion.
It's chronic. It's private suffering, grinding away at the edges of her existence day after monotonous day, and the constant noise would be part of the psychological torment, that ceaseless grating rumble of the mill, a constant reminder of your inescapable repetitive fate.
So freedom of movement is replaced by enforced repetitive motion.
Exactly. Her hands, already raw from her escape and the beatings, would just become permanently blistered and calloused and crippled by the rough handles of the mill.
So what were the typical conditions in these places, these pastrina? I mean, in terms of food and housing?
Universally horrific. These facilities often included something called the ergastulum, the slave barracks or prison. Usually it was subterranean, damp, overcrowded.
Underground.
Underground. And slaves were often chained together at night to stop any more escape attempts. The diet was minimal and monotonous. Coarse grain, maybe some cheap wine, very little fat, just enough to fuel the work, but not enough for health.
And sanitation.
Almost non-existent, which led to rampant disease, high mortality rates, especially among women whose immune systems were already so stressed.
And the air quality, that's a factor we often overlook.
Yeah.
The dust from the grinding grain would just permeate everything, coating your lungs.
Absolutely. And that dust wasn't just harmless flour. It had sharp mineral particles in it, from the millstones themselves and from the grain. Inhaling that day in and day out would lead to respiratory failure, like silicosis, a gritty, slow suffocation.
So the mill is literally consuming her body as it consumes the grain.
It is. And that's the bitter irony of the Roman system, isn't it? The very food that sustains the empire, the grain that feeds the people and the legions, it's produced by the systematic destruction of human bodies, ground down just like the grain itself.
They just prioritize cheap, replaceable labor over any kind of human welfare.
And yet, even here, in the depths of just utter despair, our sources sometimes hint at that little flicker of internal defiance.
A shared glance.
A shared glance with another woman. A silent acknowledgement of your shared suffering. Or a small, whispered warning about an overseer who's approaching.
But that kind of solidarity, even that subtle, would be so dangerous for a marked slave.
Intensely dangerous. The fugitiva was watched closely. The masters knew that if even one broken woman could still harbor a thought like that, then the example of her punishment hadn't been severe enough. The system was designed to detect and brutally suppress even the faintest glimmer of hope.
So she's a target for the overseer's lash.
A constant target. And then sometimes the monotony would be broken by the arrival of a new face. Another woman, maybe younger, also with the brand of a runaway, perhaps on her cheek.
And she would see her own past in that new arrival.
Exactly. It would just confirm the brutal effectiveness of the Roman system. No matter how many run, they will be brought back, they will be broken, and they will be thrown into the same grinder.
And as that dust and the monotony settle in, the whispers of an even harsher fate start to circulate, carried on that contaminated air like a disease, the mines.
The mines. And that signals the next phase of escalating terror.
So Section 4. The ultimate deprivation, the word mines, metalla, just hung in the air like an absolute death sentence, didn't it?
It was a place of eternal darkness, of back-breaking labor deep beneath the earth, where the sun never touched you, and your life expectancy was often measured in a few short, desperate months.
For the slaves in the mill, at least they had light, even if it was dim. The mines promised only endless gloom, choking dust, and the constant threat of a cave-in.
It's the third brutal punishment, a descent into an underground hell where your body is just consumed by the earth in the service of extracting Rome's wealth. Gold, silver, iron, lead.
And the journey there was part of the punishment, wasn't it?
A critical part of the psychological preparation. A long, arduous journey, often for days, in a cart into a barren, desolate landscape far from any cities. And the mines would just loom on the horizon, these gaping mouths in the side of a mountain, exhaling a chilled, dusty breath.
For the truly intractable, the mines were the Empire's final solution. Bury them alive while they work for you.
Exactly.
Did the ownership of the mines differ from, say, a private mill?
It did, significantly. Many of the largest and most notorious mines, especially the ones for precious metals, were state-owned. Imperial property.
So the motivation was different.
Completely. The motivation was pure extraction. It was totally divorced from any of the paternalistic or even just managerial concerns a private master might have about his investment. In the imperial mines, slaves were utterly expendable. The indifference of the overseers, who were often state contractors, was absolute.
The sounds must have been terrifying. The dull thud of picks, the distant rumble of collapsing rock, the cries, just the sight of the entrance, that dark maw swallowing people up must have filled her with this profound dread.
And inside, the darkness was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blanket that just pressed down on your mind. The only light came from these flickering oil lamps, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that played tricks on your eyes.
And the air.
The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, unventilated waste, and that metallic ore dust. She'd be given a heavy pickaxe or a hammer. Her body, already so weakened by the mill, would just protest instantly against the freezing temperatures and the constant dampness.
This wasn't work. Like we said before, it was a slow, deliberate form of self-annihilation. The constant cold, the treacherous footing in the slippery muck, the ceaseless clang of picks against rock.
And that physical demand was coupled with sensory deprivation. The goal of this phase of punishment was very specific: to extract every last spark of humanity from you, to render you utterly incapable of resistance or even independent thought.
They were trying to eradicate her internal monologue.
That's a great way to put it. Her body just moves like an automaton. Her mind becomes this numb, empty space where thoughts of escape can't even take root anymore.
And the greatest terror was just the sheer brutal expendability of life in these state-owned hells.
Absolutely. The sources confirm it. The most terrifying common occurrence was the mine collapse. One day, a dull thud, louder than usual, echoes through the tunnels. A section of the mine has failed. It's trapped several workers, maybe a dozen or more.
Panic.
Panic erupts in the tunnels around it.
And the response from the guards here, operating under this state efficiency, it's just chillingly instructive about the value of a life.
They're not concerned with the lives lost at all. They're just focused on securing the remaining workers. They prioritize preventing others from using the chaos to try and flee, or making sure the viable work teams are ready to immediately clear the collapse so they can start extracting again.
So this incident, which was terrifyingly common, was just a stark reminder of the ultimate fragility of your life there, the absolute expendability of a slave. The horror of that would just seal her internal prison tighter than any physical chain.
The goal was to push the slave past endurance, past fear, into just pure mechanical existence.
But somehow, our protagonist, she survives the mine, scarred deeper than any brand. But her transfer out of there, it wasn't a reprieve, it was just the next phase. The system always finds another layer of cruelty.
And that brings us to punishment stages 4 and 5, personalized terror and final defiance. The very fact that she survived the mill and the mines and still had a, quote, problematic spirit meant the system had to escalate the torture again.
Stage 4, re-enslavement under extreme cruelty. She was sold, probably at a deeply discounted price because of her brand, her history of defiance, and she was sold to a master known for his particular sadism.
This master, we learned from the sources, he viewed her branded arm not just as a sign of ownership, but as a direct challenge to his absolute authority. It demanded escalating torment.
Her new home was a sprawling, neglected villa, the air thick with unspoken menace.
And this master, he took a perverse pleasure in breaking spirits, specifically those who had already shown a will to resist. The other punishments had relied on physical depletion. This new stage relied on psychological devastation.
So the unrelenting toil of the mill and the mine was replaced by something else.
Psychological torment, constant surveillance, and arbitrary, unpredictable cruelty.
The lash was still there, of course, used frequently and for no reason. But the truly painful punishments were psychological, weren't they? Calculated public shaming, starvation, or threatening to harm other slaves if she didn't comply.
That unpredictability is the key to psychological torture. If the punishments are consistent, you can adjust. If they're arbitrary and always shifting, the victim can never anticipate or adapt. She would have learned to read his moods, to become utterly invisible, stifling any flicker of emotion that might draw his attention.
A terrifying, perpetual dance on the edge of a precipice.
And the casual nature of the cruelty must have been shattering. It wasn't born of passion or anger. It was born of cold, calculating power and boredom. She wasn't just a slave anymore. She was a plaything for a cruel man's amusement. Her spirit was his new conquest.
The isolation must have been immense. The other slaves, terrified of attracting his eye, would have avoided the marked fugitive, seeing her as a magnet for disaster.
And the violence she was forced to witness just served as a constant reminder of her own precarious position. The sources document a specific example of this calculated terror. A young house slave spills a drink. The master orders a public flogging, and he forces our protagonist and the other female slaves to witness it, standing rigidly to attention.
She has to stand there rigid, her mind just screaming internally, forced to internalize the horror. The sounds of the girl's cries, the sickening thud of the lash, just ripping through the silent villa.
It was a deliberate, staged act of terror, designed to break the spirits of everyone who witnessed it and reinforce the utter futility of resistance. The air was thick with the girl's anguish, a sound that would haunt her long after the whipping stopped.
But this brutal reality, this inescapable fate, it starts to hearten her. It doesn't break her completely.
Right. The initial despair gives way to this cold, burning resentment, a desperate, silent rage that just smoldered deep inside her. And this internal shift, this refusal to be utterly consumed, was a final internal act of rebellion. She moved through the villa like a phantom, her face an unreadable mask, denying her tormentors the satisfaction of her complete capitulation.
And that unbroken spirit, that quiet defiance, that was ultimately deemed too dangerous, too costly to maintain.
The master gets tired of her unyielding gaze. He decides she's a lost cause, too problematic to keep, and so she's destined for the ultimate, final punishment reserved for the truly intractable and defiant, the arena.
Stage 5. The arena and the ultimate warning. Her final fate wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a carefully orchestrated public spectacle designed to provide mass entertainment alongside a stark, terrifying social lesson.
They needed to transform her individual suffering into a collective, unforgettable lesson about the absolute response to the forbidden path of freedom.
The day came quickly. She was led through back alleys, away from the main streets, a sign that her presence, even in chains, was still considered politically volatile.
The chains on her wrists and ankles are heavy and cold, a final, undeniable statement of her status. And the arena gates loom ahead, the roar of the crowd. It's this distant, hungry, visceral sound that seeps through the thick planks.
As she's pushed through the dark, echoing passageways beneath the arena, that roar just gets deafening. It's a palpable sound that vibrates through the very stone under her feet.
The smell of blood, sweat, and fear is palpable, a heavy perfume of impending death. And her presence as a woman in this specific form of public execution made her an even more potent symbol, a unique cautionary tale against female insubordination.
And then she steps onto the sand. The sudden transition from darkness to the blinding sunlight, the roar of the crowd just intensifies. It's overwhelming.
He raises her head, slowly, deliberately. For a split second, she looks up, past the tiered seats to the vast, indifferent sky, the only thing larger than Rome itself.
In that final moment, her eyes scan the sea of faces, not looking for pity, but in a final, defiant act of just being present.
And she finds him. She locates the imperial box where her former cruel master sits, his face a mask of cold, satisfied judgment. He thinks he's won. He thinks he's succeeded in breaking her and reducing her to this final stage of public terror.
But her final defiance was her silence.
Her silence. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry out. She didn't beg for mercy. Her eyes remained fixed, not on the executioner, but on a distant point beyond the arena walls, on the faint, hazy outline of the hills she had once tried to reach.
She refused to grant the system the satisfaction of her visible terror.
She's positioned in the center. As the executioner approaches, the crowd hushes, anticipating the final blow. And in that last suspended moment, she's no longer just a slave, a runaway, a branded piece of property. She is simply a woman reclaiming, in her final breath, the agency that was so brutally denied to her. Her silence was a profound statement that her spirit remained fundamentally untamed.
That is an absolutely agonizing and structurally complex journey. We've traced a progression of 5 brutal, distinct stages of systematic destruction, from the acute pain of branding and public shame, to the grinding physical hell of the mill, the suffocating darkness of the mines, the insidious psychological torture of the cruel master, and finally, that ultimate public obliteration in the arena.
What's really insightful here is the sheer systematic design of it all. This was not random violence. It was a calculated, escalating curriculum of cruelty intended to obliterate the will, to reforge the victim's identity entirely as a disposable commodity.
Her progression through these stages, each one designed to be worse than the last.
Yeah.
That was the Roman method of maximizing deterrence.
And ensuring absolute compliance through terror.
It's easy to just focus on the physical suffering, but the real lesson here is in this system's obsessive focus on the spirit. They needed to ensure not just that she was dead, but that her spirit of resistance was visibly, dramatically annihilated for everyone to see.
Right. If the public saw her break, their own internal resistance would be weakened.
And yet, what stands out in the collected narratives from the sources is that final flicker of defiance.
It is.
Even in the face of that absolute systemic destruction, when the state and the master tried to own every last thought and reaction, a small, stubborn measure of self could be preserved.
A quiet dignity asserted in that final refusal to show fear, to beg, to grant her tormentors the satisfaction of her utter capitulation.
So what does this progression through hell tell us about the ultimate power dynamic?
I think it leaves us with this chilling, enduring testament to the unyielding nature of the human spirit that dares to dream of freedom. Even when you're stripped of every physical right, every legal protection, and you're facing public annihilation, the final, unassailable act of defiance is sometimes just refusing to let them control how you meet your end. Indeed, the ultimate powerful realization is that true freedom isn't just about successfully escaping your geographical chains. It's about the internal decision to refuse to be internally broken. And that's a concept the Roman Empire, for all its military and political might, could ultimately only destroy externally, not control internally.
A profound and crucial piece of historical analysis. Thank you for walking us through this difficult but necessary deep dive into the darkest corners of ancient power and the architecture of Roman control.
Thank you.
Until next time.